For any soldier, becoming a prisoner of war can be one of the worst experiences ever. However, not becoming a prisoner of war can also be a terrible thing. Now, for this guy right here, this is Travis King, a U.S. Army private who was stationed in South Korea, who willingly defected into North Korea. But here's what the issue is. We are still technically at war with North Korea, and Travis King is being held as a prisoner. So why is he not a prisoner of war? And not only that, there was another U.S. Army soldier who did the same exact thing Travis King did, but in Afghanistan, yet the U.S. military called him a prisoner of war. Okay, so first things first, let's actually form the whole story of what Travis King did, and then we'll get an idea as to why the U.S. military will not call him a prisoner of war.
What we do know is that one of our service members who was on a tour willfully and without authorization crossed the military demarcation line. We believe that he is in the BRK custody. And so we're closely monitoring and investigating the situation and working to notify the soldiers next of kin and engaging to address this incident. In terms of my concerns, I'm absolutely foremost concerned about the welfare of our.
Okay, and a little more context to the story. This private, Travis King, also punched a South Korean in the face. He destroyed a cop car. This private was clearly not in the right mental state. Nonetheless, he managed to join a tourist group on the DMZ, demilitarized zone, and willingly just crossed over into North Korea. Many people speculate it was to avoid whatever punishment he might be facing over in the United States. Okay, for those of you who are not aware, there are actually standards that would constitute a soldier to become a prisoner of war, from the Geneva Convention or the International Humanitarian Law. Here are the standards. Prisoners of war are combatants who have fallen into the hands of the enemy, or specific non-combatants whom the status of a prisoner of war is granted by the International Humanitarian Law. Okay, so the following categories of persons are technically prisoners of war. Members of the armed forces of a party to the conflict, including members of militias or volunteer corps forming part of such armed forces. Members of other military or other volunteer corps that belong to a party to the conflict, provided that such groups are under responsible command, have a fixed distinctive sign recognizable at a distance, carry arms openly. And we'll do one more. Civilians who accompany the armed forces provided they are authorized by the armed force they accompany. Now, I already see where things are not lining up and why Travis King will probably never be called a prisoner of war. Let's dig into this real quick. Okay, one thing we have to remember is that yes, Travis King is a U.S. Army soldier, but during the actions of crossing over into the DMZ, he did not have a fixed distinctive sign recognizable at a distance. He was also not authorized, as we see here in Part C, that he was not authorized by the armed force he accompanied to be within the area of the DMZ. In fact, there's video proof showcasing Travis King blending in with the DMZ tourist group and him not wearing any sort of insignia or not implying that he's part of the U.S. Army.
It all happened pretty quickly. I probably only saw him running for like a few seconds.
That right there, do you see any sort of insignia? Do you see any sort of implication that he is a U.S. Army soldier? I'm not trying to be critical here. I'm just going based off of the standard of what it means to be a POW, a prisoner of war. And unfortunately for Travis King, there is video evidence right here. He is not meeting the criteria and the standards to be a prisoner of war. And something to reiterate, in the international humanitarian law, combatants are required to distinguish themselves from the civilian population while they are engaged in an attack or in a military operation preparatory to an attack. Now, I know what you guys are saying, this wasn't technically a military operation, but to North Korea, everything is a military operation in their eyes. They cannot stand the United States. They cannot stand South Korea. And that whole DMZ thing is really just a show of force on both sides to showcase, look who's bigger and badder. We are the best. Nonetheless, Travis King, in my eyes, and the United States, he does not qualify for the POW status. So what exactly does this imply? Well, before we get into the implications for Travis King, we need to look at another case where a soldier willingly, just like Travis King, walked into the hands of the enemy, but they were called a prisoner of war. Now, this right here is Bowe Bergdahl. And I know some of you are really triggered right now, especially those of us who have ever served in the US Army or those of us who are old enough to remember who this man is. This guy willingly left his post in Afghanistan and just got captured by the Taliban. Now, again, I say willingly. And the thing is, he was called a prisoner of war. And not only that, we are talking massive search parties to even find this guy. Some people even lost their lives looking for him. And at the end of the day, it was found out he willingly defected into the hands of the Taliban. Now, excuse the bad video quality you guys are about to encounter in the next few clips, but you have to understand this is back in 2009, and a lot of the footage that you see of Bergdahl was actually from the Taliban. So again, it's their video quality. Don't get mad at me. They're shooting at 144p. Nonetheless, Bergdahl, for the most part, was called a prisoner of war because he was being tortured by the Taliban. He was captured by the Taliban, and that was the verbiage that at the time was being used to defend the fact that Bergdahl is a prisoner of war.
Okay. When you were coming to Afghanistan, what did your leaders tell you? Like, who were you fighting?
Our leaders told us that we would be fighting the Taliban.
Now, the biggest difference between Bergdahl and Travis King, again, is that POW status. And luckily for Bergdahl, regardless of all of the drama surrounding him where he willingly ran away to the Taliban's hands, and many people imply that he wasn't even in Afghanistan this whole time, he was sent to Pakistan, being a POW meant that he was on mission sets, which means like if you were going out on a patrol, just so you guys know, you might run into Bergdahl, and there's Bergdahl is out there, so just in case he's out there, you guys go and save him. And there are actually soldiers who've been taken out and hurt because they were on missions where they were looking for Bergdahl, or Bergdahl was on the mission set or on the mission list, just in case you guys run into him. Nonetheless, being a POW, Bergdahl was eventually saved. Again, I'm sorry for the quality of the video, but here's a very intense prisoner exchange where Bergdahl was finally released to the United States military. And I just have to say this because, again, I was a U.S. Army soldier and I'm cringing watching this. These soldiers, I'm assuming they're either Delta or at least Special Forces nonetheless, are risking everyone's lives to go get a guy who willingly defected away, yet because he was called a prisoner of war, he has a status where every soldier, you cannot leave a soldier behind. We have all said this. We've raised our right hand and said we will not leave a soldier behind. So these guys, again, are risking their lives for a quote-unquote prisoner of war who willingly defected. So this is kind of hard to watch, but again, I'm trying to give you guys, I'm trying to show you guys what it means to be a prisoner of war and why Travis King will definitely not be getting this treatment since he's not a prisoner of war. Now, even though the U.S. military is not calling Travis King a prisoner of war, this doesn't mean we are not trying to get him back and we are not in constant communication with North Korea. In fact, North Korea has acknowledged we do have Travis King, or at least we know about Travis King.
United Nations Command did communicate to the Joint Security Agency. I can confirm that the DPRK has responded to United Nations Command.
But little else is known about the conditions under which King is being held and whether he's cooperating with North Korean intelligence. The Pentagon is conducting a joint investigation with U.S. forces in Korea about King's actions, while the State Department reaches out to regional powers like China to help learn more.
Have the Chinese indicated in any direction whether they're willing to engage on that?
I don't know if it can. I just don't know if it can.
Also, while I was doing this video to further look for evidence as to why Travis King will not be called a prisoner of war, I found an article where Texas Tech University School of Law military law expert Jeffrey Korn said, It would be difficult for the U.S. to assert that King is a prisoner of war, in part because there was no active fighting at the time on the peninsula. He wasn't really captured in the context of hostilities, sort of like we talked about over at the beginning of the video with the whole international humanitarian law standards. And real quick, before we get over to Travis King, I just want to say this last comment on Bergdahl. In the case of Bergdahl, calling him a prisoner of war, we were in an active conflict. He was wearing a U.S. Army uniform, and he was identified as an enemy to the Taliban. So nonetheless, yes, he did technically qualify as a prisoner of war when you look at the rest of the Geneva Convention. I am not sticking up for this man in any way, shape, or form. I know he willingly did what he did, but nonetheless, that is the biggest distinction between him and Travis King, was the fact that he was wearing a uniform and we were in active combat. But in the case of Travis King not wearing a uniform, he was not in an active combat situation. And not only that, the fact that he is a U.S. Army soldier and he was blending into the population, North Korea might actually have a case for technical war crimes. Now, I know they've never signed anything, but I'm just saying you can't blend in with a population and then run into a territory. I mean, that's technically spying, or at least trying to blend in with the enemy. And again, North Korea sees the United States and sees South Korea as the enemy. So like I said at the beginning of the video, it's a very bad thing for any soldier to become a prisoner of war, but it's also a really bad thing to not become a prisoner of war, because unfortunately for Travis, not all of the resources are going to be put on him to try getting him back. As you can see, North Korea did respond, China, but nonetheless, the United States can only do so much. He's in a country that's called the Hermit Kingdom, and even people within that country have no idea what's going on. We can only assume that Travis King is being paraded around and shown how strong North Korea is because we captured a U.S. Army soldier. But again, I just want to say this because this was used as an educational tool and purpose. The biggest distinction to become a POW is you have to follow and hit those standards upheld by the Geneva Convention and the rules of war, mostly being that you have to have been in an armed conflict, you have to be an enemy combatant, you have to be identified, you have to be captured by the opposition. These are all the standards it takes to become a prisoner of war. Travis King pretty much hits none of them other than him being captured by the enemy. Nonetheless, that's what's happening. If you want my actual opinion, I don't think we'll be seeing Travis King back anytime soon, considering North Korea is in the middle of testing of their missile programs. So yeah, that's what's currently happening right now. We've sort of gone radio silent on the whole Travis King situation, but the U.S. military is still actively trying to get him back nonetheless, even though he's not a prisoner of war. So there is maybe some hope for Travis King, but again, if I had to take an educated guess, I don't think we'll be seeing him anytime soon.